moving truck pulled away from the curb as Regina Williams stood on the front lawn of her new home, keys clutched tightly in her hand. A smile spread across her face as she looked up at the beautiful two-story house with its fresh white paint and dark blue shutters. After 20 years of dedicated service on the police force and her recent promotion to police chief of Westlake City, Regina had finally been able to buy her dream home. "I still can't believe it's mine," she whispered to herself, walking up the stone pathway that led to the front door. The house sat in Oakwood Heights, one of the most sought-after neighborhoods in town. Beautiful old trees lined the streets, and every lawn looked like it belonged in a magazine. Regina had driven through this neighborhood for years, admiring the homes and wondering if she would ever be able to afford one. As she unlocked her front door, Regina noticed an older couple walking their dog across the street. They glanced her way, then quickly looked down and hurried along. Regina's smile dimmed slightly. She had noticed similar reactions from a few other neighbors during the moving process. As one of the few black homeowners in this mostly white neighborhood, Regina knew what those looks meant, but she wasn't going to let them spoil her happiness. "Their problem, not mine," she said firmly, pushing open her door. Inside, moving boxes were stacked in every room. Regina had spent the past week slowly unpacking, starting with the kitchen and her bedroom. There was still plenty to do, but that could wait. Today was Saturday, her day off, and the July heat had pushed the temperature well into the 90s. The perfect day to enjoy one of the main reasons she'd fallen in love with this house, the backyard pool. Regina changed into her favorite blue swimsuit and wrapped a colorful sarong around her waist. She grabbed a beach towel, her current mystery novel, and headed to the kitchen to prepare a cold drink. She squeezed fresh lemons into a pitcher of water, added ice cubes and a sprig of mint from the small herb garden the previous owners had left behind. "Perfect," she said, taking a sip. The backyard was Regina's private paradise. A tall wooden fence surrounded the property, giving her plenty of privacy. The pool wasn't huge, but it was beautifully maintained, with clear blue water that sparkled in the sunlight. Around it, the previous owners had planted flowering bushes that added bursts of color to the landscape. Regina set up the lounger in her favorite spot, where she could get sun, but also had some shade from a nearby oak tree when she needed it. She arranged her towel, placed her drink on the small table beside her, and settled in with her book. "This is what 20 years of hard work gets you," she said with satisfaction, dipping her feet into the cool water. The journey to this moment hadn't been easy. Regina had started as a patrol officer in a tough district. She'd worked double shifts, studied at night for her promotions, and pushed through barriers that tried to hold her back. Each step up the ladder had been a fight, especially as a black woman in a field dominated by white men. She thought about her parents, both teachers, who had saved every penny to put her through college. They hadn't lived to see her become police chief, but she knew they would be proud of her now. Her mother would have especially loved this house. "You'd approve, Mom," Regina said, looking up at the clear blue sky. The heat of the day wrapped around her like a blanket as she opened her book. This was her first real day off in weeks. As the new police chief, her schedule had been packed with meetings, community events, and managing department issues. Today, though, was just for her. Regina took a long sip of her lemonade and began to read. The story quickly pulled her in, a mystery about a detective solving a cold case. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice the slight movement of curtains in the window of the house next door, or the shadow of a figure watching her with growing concern. Behind those curtains, a pair of eyes narrowed at the sight of the unfamiliar woman lounging by the pool. The watcher had lived in Oakwood Heights for 15 years and prided herself on knowing everyone in the neighborhood, but she didn't recognize this woman. And in her mind, that meant trouble. "Who is that?" the neighbor whispered to herself, reaching for her phone. "And what is she doing in the Miller's backyard?" Regina turned another page, completely unaware that her peaceful afternoon was about to be disrupted in a way she never expected. The sun warmed her skin, the water cooled her feet, and her book transported her to another world. It was everything she had worked for, this moment of perfect peace in her own home. Little did she know that just a few yards away, Someone was about to make a phone call that would turn her perfect day upside down. All because they couldn't believe someone who looked like her could possibly belong in this neighborhood. Elaine Whitman stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, staring at the woman lounging by the pool next door. She took a small sip of her now cold coffee and frowned. In the 15 years she had lived in Oakwood Heights, Elaine had made it her business to know everyone. She organized the annual block party, headed the homeowners association meetings, and kept a careful eye on everything that happened on her street. "Who on earth is that?" she whispered to herself, setting down her mug on the counter with a soft thud. The house next door had been sold just 2 weeks ago. The Millers, who had lived there for nearly 20 years, had finally decided to retire to Florida. Elaine had watched the moving trucks come and go with mixed feelings. The Millers had been good neighbors, quiet, respectful, and most importantly, in Elaine's mind, the right kind of people for Oakwood Heights. Elaine hadn't met the new owners, yet despite her usual practice of welcoming newcomers with her famous blueberry muffins, she'd been planning to drop by later that week, once they had settled in. But now, seeing a black woman casually using the pool as if she owned the place, Elaine felt a knot forming in her stomach. "They must have sold to a family that lets their housekeeper use the pool," she muttered, reaching for the binoculars she kept in the kitchen drawer for bird watching. Through the lenses, Elaine studied the woman more closely. She was wearing an expensive-looking swimsuit and reading what appeared to be a mystery novel. Elaine recognized the bright cover from the display at the local bookstore. The woman seemed completely at ease, sipping from a glass of something cold, her feet dangling in the water. "That's strange," Elaine said to herself, lowering the binoculars. "She's acting like she lives there." Elaine's husband Tom had left early that morning for his weekly golf game. If he were home, he'd probably tell her to mind her own business. "Not everyone in the world needs your supervision, Elaine," he often said with a sigh. But Tom didn't understand the importance of maintaining neighborhood standards. Oakwood Heights was special precisely because people like Elaine made sure it stayed that way. She moved from the kitchen to the living room, where she had a better view of the backyard next door. Drawing back the curtains just enough to peek through, she continued her surveillance. The woman had shifted positions now, lying back on the lounger with her book held above her face, completely absorbed in her reading. Something's not right, Elaine decided, reaching for her phone on the coffee table. She hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the screen. Maybe she should just go over and introduce herself. Ask the woman directly what she was doing. There? But what if the woman was dangerous? What if she had broken in? "Better safe than sorry," Elaine said firmly, dialing the non-emergency police number she had programmed into her phone years ago for neighborhood watch purposes. When the call connected, Elaine cleared her throat and put on what Tom called her official business voice. "Yes, hello. This is Elaine Whitman from 247 Oakwood Drive. I need to report a possible trespasser." She paused, listening to the dispatcher's question. No immediate danger that I can see. But there's a woman using the pool at the house next door, and I know for a fact that the new owners haven't moved in yet." Another pause as the dispatcher asked for more details. "Well, she's a black woman," Elaine said, lowering her voice slightly as if someone might overhear, even though she was alone in the house. "I've never seen her around here before. The neighborhood is mostly, well, you know how it is. I'm just concerned, because the house was only sold recently and I haven't met the new owners yet." The dispatcher's voice came through the phone, asking Elaine if she had spoken to the woman. "No, I haven't approached her," Elaine replied, her tone becoming defensive. "I don't think that would be safe. What if she's not supposed to be there? What if she broke in? The gate was unlocked, I noticed that yesterday." Elaine glanced back out the window. The woman had sat up and was refilling her glass from a pitcher on the small table beside her lounger. "She looks very comfortable, like she belongs there," Elaine continued, doubt creeping into her voice for the first time. "But I've lived here for 15 years and I know all the neighbors. The Millers never mentioned selling to someone like her." The dispatcher assured Elaine they would send an officer to check it out. Elaine thanked them and hung up, feeling a mixture of relief and self-righteousness. She was just doing her civic duty after all. Keeping the neighborhood safe was everyone's responsibility. She returned to the window, watching as the woman slipped fully into the pool now, swimming a slow, graceful lap from one end to the other. Elaine's certainty began to waver slightly. The woman moved with the confidence of someone in their own space, not the furtive movements of a trespasser. "Well, the police will sort it out," she said to herself, still watching. "If I'm wrong, no harm done, better to be safe." Elaine had no idea that her concerned citizen call was about to create a situation far more uncomfortable than she could imagine. She had no way of knowing that the woman she was reporting was not only the new rightful owner of the house, but someone with significant authority in their community. As she settled into her favorite armchair to wait for the police to arrive, Elaine was blissfully unaware that she was about to become an example of exactly the kind of prejudiced thinking that had no place in modern society, even in exclusive neighborhoods like Oakwood Heights. Officer David Rodriguez pulled their police cruiser to a stop about a house away from the address they'd been given. His partner, Officer Lily Chen, was checking the details of the call on their dashboard computer. 47 Oakwood Drive reporting. "A possible trespasser at 249, Lily confirmed, looking up at the beautiful homes lining the street. "Caller says someone's using the pool who doesn't belong there." David nodded, putting the car in park. "Oakwood Heights," he said with a slight shake of his head. "You know what they're like around here. Probably someone's guest who doesn't fit their idea of who belongs." Lily was about to respond when she suddenly straightened in her seat. "Wait a minute. 249 Oakwood Drive? Isn't that Chief Williams's new place?" David finished for her, recognition dawning on his face. "Yeah, I think it is. She mentioned buying in this neighborhood at the department cookout last month." The two officers exchanged meaningful glances. Regina Williams had been appointed police chief of Westlake City just 3 months ago, after 20 years of distinguished service. She was respected throughout the department for her fairness, intelligence, and no-nonsense approach to policing. She was also the first black woman to hold the position in the city's history. $10 says our trespasser is the chief enjoying her day off in her own backyard, Lily said with a grimace. David sighed and reached for his radio. "We should call this in. Let dispatch know that the address belongs to Chief Williams." Lily put her hand on his arm. "Wait, we're already here. Protocol says we need to check it out anyway. And honestly, I'd rather explain to the chief in person than have her get a call from dispatch about someone reporting her as a trespasser in her own home." David nodded slowly. "You're right, that's not a phone call anyone should have to get." He took his hand off the radio. "Let's do this by the book. Respond to the call, clear the situation, and then let the chief know what happened." They got out of the cruiser, adjusting their uniforms in the sweltering heat. The temperature had climbed past 90 degrees, and both officers could feel sweat beginning to form under their bulletproof vests. "Brutal day to be wearing all this," David commented as they walked up the immaculately maintained street. The houses in Oakwood Heights were all large, well-kept and expensive. Most had perfectly manicured lawns and fancy cars in the driveways. As they approached number 247, Lily noticed movement at the window. Curtains quickly pulled shut as they walked past. "Our caller is watching," she said quietly to David. "Probably wondering why we didn't pull up with sirens blaring." David nodded but kept his eyes forward. When they reached number 249, he stopped at the front gate. It was unlocked, just as the caller had mentioned. "Westlake Police," he called out clearly but not too loudly. The last thing he wanted was to create a scene in the neighborhood if this was, as they both suspected, a false alarm. They walked up the stone path that led to the front door. The house was beautiful. A 2-story colonial with fresh paint and blue shutters. There were still a few moving boxes visible through the front window, evidence of a recent move-in. "Should we knock?" Lily asked. David considered for a moment. The call mentioned someone in the backyard. Let's check there first, following protocol. They moved around the side of the house through a wooden gate that led to the backyard. As they rounded the corner, the pool came into view. And so did their boss. Chief Regina Williams was swimming laps in her pool, her strong arms cutting smoothly through the water. She hadn't heard them over the sound of splashing. A book lay open on a lounger nearby, alongside a half-empty pitcher of what looked like lemonade. David and Lily stood awkwardly for a moment, neither wanting to startle the chief during her day off. Finally, Lily cleared her throat loudly. Regina stopped mid-stroke and looked up. Surprise crossed her face when she saw the two officers standing by her pool in full uniform. "Officers," she said, swimming to the edge of the pool nearest them. "Is everything all right?" David stepped forward, his discomfort evident in the stiff way he held himself. "Chief Williams, we're sorry to disturb you on your day off." Regina hoisted herself out of the pool and reached for a towel that was draped over a nearby chair. She wrapped it around herself, water dripping onto the concrete. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice shifting slightly from casual to professional. Even in a swimsuit and dripping wet, her authority was unmistakable. Lily stepped forward. "Ma'am, we received a call about a possible trespasser at this address using the pool." She paused, the ridiculousness of the situation hanging in the air between them. Regina stood very still for a moment, towel clutched around her midsection. Her expression changed as understanding dawned. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally a controlled anger that both officers recognized from particularly difficult departmental meetings. "I see," Regina said, her voice carefully neutral. "And who made this call?" David shifted uncomfortably. "A neighbor, ma'am, from next door. She reported seeing someone she didn't recognize using the pool and was concerned that, well, that you didn't belong here." Regina's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Because the house was recently sold or because of how I look, Officer Rodriguez?" Neither officer answered, but their expressions said enough. Regina took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "Well, as you can see, I am not trespassing in my own backyard. I'm simply trying to enjoy my Saturday off." She gestured to her book and the lemonade. "I closed on this house 2 weeks ago. It seems my neighbor made some assumptions rather than coming over to introduce herself." "We're very sorry about this, Chief," Lily said sincerely. "We recognized the address when we got the call but thought it best to respond according to protocol rather than having dispatch call you about it." Regina nodded, appreciating their handling of the situation. "You did the right thing, officers. Thank you." She was about to say more when a movement caught her eye. At the fence separating her property from number 247, a woman's face appeared, first cautious, then surprised as she took in the scene. Two police officers speaking respectfully to the very woman she had reported. "I believe that's my concerned neighbor now," Regina said, her voice deliberately loud enough to carry across the yard. She gave a small, tight smile. "Perhaps it's time for a proper introduction." Regina Williams adjusted her towel and walked toward the fence, water still dripping from her hair down her back. The hot sun quickly dried her skin as she moved across her backyard, with the confident stride that had earned her respect in the police department. Officers Chen and Rodriguez followed a few steps behind, their faces professionally neutral despite the awkwardness of the situation. Elaine Whitman stood frozen at the fence, her fingers gripping the wooden planks so tightly, her knuckles had turned white. When she'd seen the police officers enter the backyard next door, she'd expected them to confront the trespasser and escort her off the property. Instead, they were speaking to the woman with respect, almost deference. Something was very wrong. Curiosity had gotten the better of Elaine, driving her outside and to the fence to get a better look. Now, as the woman approached with two uniformed officers behind her, Elaine felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. "Hello there," Regina said, her voice calm, but with an unmistakable edge of authority. "I believe you must be my neighbor." She extended her hand over the fence. "I'm Regina Williams. I moved in 2 weeks ago." Elaine hesitated before reaching out to shake Regina's hand. Her own felt clammy compared to Regina's firm, confident grip. I'm Elaine Whitman," she stammered, her eyes darting between Regina and the officers. "I live next door." "Yes, I gathered that," Regina said with a small, tight smile. "Officer Rodriguez here tells me that someone from your address called the police about a trespasser in my backyard. I assume that was you?" Elaine's face flushed. Red. She looked down at her gardening shoes. There's been a misunderstanding. I didn't know that I was the new owner? Regina finished for her, her tone still measured but with an undercurrent of tension. Or that someone who looks like me could afford a house in Oakwood Heights. Elaine's head snapped up, her embarrassment quickly shifting to defensiveness. Now wait just a minute. That's not fair. I was just being cautious. I didn't know who you were. The Millers never mentioned selling to. She trailed off, realizing too late where her sentence was headed. To a black woman? Regina supplied, raising an eyebrow. Is that what you were going to say, Ms. Whitman? Behind Regina, Officer Chen shifted uncomfortably. Officer Rodriguez looked like he wanted to be anywhere else but standing in this backyard, witnessing this confrontation. I've been a part of the neighborhood watch for 15 years, Elaine said, lifting her chin. We look out for each other here. I saw someone I didn't recognize using the Miller's pool. What was I supposed to think? Perhaps, Regina said evenly. You could have thought to introduce yourself first before calling the police. That might have saved everyone some time and embarrassment. She gestured to the officers behind her. Officer Rodriguez and Officer Chen have better things to do on a Saturday than respond to calls about homeowners enjoying their own properties. Elaine's flush deepened. She glanced at the officers who were trying their best to maintain professional expressions. How was I supposed to know you were the new owner? Elaine protested, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. You weren't, Regina acknowledged with a slight nod. But that's my point, Ms. Whitman. You made assumptions based on what you saw, a black woman in a predominantly white neighborhood, and your first instinct was to call the police rather than simply saying hello. Elaine started to object, but Regina held up a hand. I've been a police officer for 20 years, Ms. Whitman. I've seen this scenario play out more times than I can count. The difference is that today I happen to be on the receiving end of it. Regina's voice remained steady, but there was an intensity in her eyes that made Elaine take a small step back from the fence. And as it happens, I'm also the chief of police in Westlake City. The color drained from Elaine's face. You're the police chief? Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat. Yes, ma'am. Chief Williams was appointed 3 months ago. She's our boss. Elaine looked as though she might faint. Her hand went to her throat and she swallowed hard. I had no idea. I never would have called the police if you'd known who I was. Regina finished for her. That's part of the problem, isn't it? No one should have the police called on them for simply existing in a space where they have every right to be, regardless of their job title. A painful silence stretched between them. In the distance, a lawnmower hummed and children's laughter floated on the hot summer air. Normal Saturday sounds that seemed surreal against the tension of this backyard confrontation. Regina sighed, some of the stiffness leaving her shoulders. Look, Ms. Whitman, what's done is done. I'm not going to press charges for filing a false police report, although technically I could. Elaine's eyes widened. Press charges? But I was just being cautious. Yes, you said that. Regina nodded. And I'm choosing to believe that's true, that this was about caution and not about... She gestured to her own face. Other factors. Officer Chen stepped forward. Chief, we should probably get back to our patrol. Regina turned and nodded. Of course, officer. Thank you both for your professionalism today. As the officers prepared to leave, Regina turned back to Elaine, who was still standing at the fence looking mortified. Ms. Whitman, I'll be living here for quite some time. We're neighbors now. Regina's tone was more gentle than before. I'd prefer it if we could start fresh. Maybe next time you have concerns, you could come talk to me directly instead of calling. My officers. Elaine nodded quickly, grateful for the small olive branch. Yes, of course, I'm very sorry for the misunderstanding. I've just put on a fresh pot of coffee, Regina said after a moment of consideration. Would you like to come over? We could have a proper introduction. The invitation hung in the air between them. Elaine looked surprised, then conflicted, as if weighing her embarrassment against the potential advantages of making peace with the new neighbor, who also happened to be the chief of police. Yes, Elaine finally said. I think that would be good. Let me just... She gestured vaguely toward her house. Let me get my husband. He should be back from golf soon. We'd both like to welcome you properly to the neighborhood. Regina nodded. I'll be here. Just come around through the front gate. She turned to follow the officers, then paused and looked back over her shoulder. Oh, and Ms. Whitman, you might want to bring those blueberry muffins I've heard so much about. The Millers mentioned them when I bought the house. Elaine's mouth opened in surprise, then closed again. She nodded and hurried back to her house, her mind racing with the implications of what had just happened, and how quickly her standing in the neighborhood watch might plummet if word got out about her monumental mistake. 3 weeks after the backyard incident, Regina Williams stood on her back patio, arranging platters of food on the long table she'd rented for the occasion. The late August sun still blazed hot overhead, but a gentle breeze made the heat more bearable. Colorful paper lanterns hung from the trees surrounding the yard, and a portable speaker played soft jazz music near the pool. Chief, need any help with those? Officer David Rodriguez called as he entered the backyard, carrying a large bowl of his grandmother's famous potato salad. Regina smiled at him. Thanks, David. You can put that right here by the other sides. She pointed to a space on the table. And please, it's Regina today. We're off duty. David nodded and set down his contribution. Place looks great. You've really settled in nicely. Getting there, Regina agreed, looking around with satisfaction at her home. In the weeks since moving in, she'd added personal touches throughout the house and yard. Family photos on the walls, her collection of art books displayed in the living room, and flowering plants around the pool. It finally felt like hers. More guests began arriving, officers from the department and their families, a few colleagues from City Hall, and several neighbors who had been friendlier than Elaine Whitman in welcoming her to Oakwood Heights. Regina greeted each one warmly, enjoying the way her personal and professional worlds were blending at this neighborhood barbecue. Chief Williams, a voice called from the side gate. Regina turned to see Mayor Thompson entering with his wife. She walked over to greet them. Mayor, Mrs. Thompson, I'm so glad you could make it, she said, shaking their hands. Wouldn't miss it, the mayor replied with a smile. Best chance I'll get to talk to you without scheduling through 3 assistants. He looked around appreciatively. Beautiful place you've got here. As Regina chatted with the mayor about the upcoming community policing initiative, she noticed Elaine and Tom Whitman hovering uncertainly by the entrance to the backyard. Elaine was clutching a covered dish, and Tom was holding a bottle of wine, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Excuse me for just a moment, Regina said to the mayor before walking over to the Whitmans. Elaine, Tom, she greeted them with a nod. I'm glad you could make it. Elaine shifted awkwardly from one foot to the other. Thank you for inviting us. I brought my spinach dip, and Tom picked out a nice red wine. That's very thoughtful, Regina said, accepting their offerings. Please help yourselves to drinks, the food will be ready soon. As the Whitmans moved toward the drinks table, Regina noticed how the other neighbors watched them. Word had spread quickly through Oakwood Heights about the incident, as people had taken to calling it. Some found it amusing that stuck-up Elaine Whitman had called the police on the new police chief. Others were embarrassed on behalf of the neighborhood. A few had privately agreed with Elaine's caution, but would never admit it publicly. Regina had been approached by 5 different neighbors in the first week after the incident, each one eager to distance themselves from Elaine's actions. We're not all like that, they'd said in various ways. Regina had nodded politely at each one, while wondering how many of them might have done exactly the same thing in Elaine's position. The party continued as the sun began its slow descent. Children played in the shallow end of the pool while adults gathered in small groups around the yard, plates balanced on their laps, conversations flowing as freely as the lemonade and iced tea Regina had prepared in large quantities. After everyone had eaten, Regina clinked her glass with a spoon to get their attention. The crowd quieted, turning toward her expectantly. I want to thank you all for coming today, she began, looking around at the diverse group gathered in her backyard. When I bought this house, I was looking for more than just a place to live. I wanted a community. She paused, letting her gaze sweep over her guests. In my 20 years as a police officer, I've learned that community is built on understanding, on communication, and sometimes on working through misunderstandings. Several people glanced toward Elaine, who stared fixedly at her plate. That's why, Regina continued, I want to announce a new initiative we'll be starting next month at the Westlake Police Department. We're calling it Neighbors Together, and it will bring officers and community members together for regular discussion sessions on topics like safety, bias, and effective communication. A murmur of interest rippled through the crowd. The first session will focus on when and when not to call the police, Regina said with just the hint of a smile. And I've asked Mrs. Whitman to co-host it with me, to share her perspective on neighborhood safety concerns. All eyes turned to Elaine, whose head snapped up in surprise. She clearly hadn't been expecting this public acknowledgement or responsibility. Well, yes, Elaine stammered, standing up. Chief Williams and I have had several conversations about this, and She took a deep breath. I've learned a lot in the past few weeks about making assumptions. Her voice grew steadier as she continued. If my experience can help others think twice before jumping to conclusions, then something good can come from my mistake. Regina nodded appreciatively. The conversations she and Elaine had shared over coffee during the past weeks hadn't been easy ones, but they had been necessary. Elaine wasn't fully transformed. Decades of ingrained biases didn't disappear overnight. But she was making an effort. That was something. As the party continued, Regina found herself standing by the pool, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Officer Lily Chen joined her, holding a glass of lemonade. That was a clever move, Chief, Lily said quietly, getting Mrs. Whitman involved in the program. Regina shrugged. It's not just clever, it's practical. People will listen to her in a way they might not listen to me. And she needs this as much as the community does. Lily nodded thoughtfully. You know, when we got that call about a trespasser in your backyard, I was so angry on your behalf. I couldn't believe someone would be so... Well, you know. I do know, Regina said with a slight smile. I've dealt with it my whole life. But getting angry doesn't change minds. Having uncomfortable conversations might. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as Tom Whitman cautiously approached a group of officers who were debating the merits of different barbecue techniques. After a moment's hesitation, one of them made space for Tom to join the circle. Look at that, Lily said, nodding toward the group. Small steps. That's how change happens, Regina agreed. One backyard conversation at a time. As the evening deepened into night, Regina looked around at her yard filled with neighbors and colleagues, people who had started as strangers but were slowly becoming a community. It wasn't perfect. There would be more difficult conversations, more moments of discomfort and learning on all sides. But it was a beginning, and as she watched Elaine Whitman hesitantly join a conversation with the mayor's wife and one of the department secretaries, Regina allowed herself to feel cautiously optimistic. The incident that could have driven a permanent wedge between her and her neighbors had instead opened a door to something better, not just for Regina, but for everyone in Oakwood Heights. Sometimes, Regina thought as she moved to refill the empty punch bowl, the most important changes started in the most unexpected places, like a backyard pool on a hot summer day when someone made the wrong call for the right reasons and accidentally set in motion something much bigger than themselves.